Hi there. This is a topic I wanted to do anyway, but a Facebook friend, Saul Marcus, I think, actually discussed it himself, and I thought it was quite interesting. Joined in, and it had an unanticipated or unintended consequence. And the issue is the one of truth, because we have the truth movement, we have the government telling us what the truth is. We have researchers, including myself, whatever, trying to find out what the truth is in a matter. And yet we have something like the Earth is flat is sort of where it doesn't matter if my personal take is I can show geometrically that clearly the world is approximately spherical. Time zones. A person at sunset has to look sunrise has to look horizontally to see the sun. A person at midday has to look up, and a person at sunset has to look horizontally. And if you draw those on a piece of paper, those can only apply to essentially a circular or elliptical shape. Whereas if the Earth is flat, everybody experiences sunrise at the same time, everyone experiences sunset at the same time, even if the angles are slightly different. And that's obviously not the case. So, yeah, I mean, it's pretty straightforward. The geometry is there, that we are on an essentially spherical object. But that doesn't stop people believing in a flat Earth and providing evidence of a flat Earth. It's like, okay, fine. So we go back to, I am, my core principle or observation, which is that everything ultimately has to be received by me, and by extension received by yourself. But even I can't say that. Maybe you have a chip in your brain instead of the grey matter that I think most humans have. I don't know, but fairly generically, we receive input and we come to some sort of conclusion or awareness. And if awareness precedes existence, which is somewhat the metaphysical perspective, then you're gonna, even before you start receiving input, you have awareness. But yeah, it's another story. But the point is that it doesn't matter what the world thinks. Ultimately, you will receive it into your awareness, into your brain, into your consciousness, and it's up to you what you do with it. So what then does that mean for truth? Well, ultimately it means that a human being can believe that they are so clever that they have figured out the true and absolute truth, and they can insist upon it, and they can tell you that why it has to be the absolute truth, but it still has to go into your mind, and if you don't accept it, you don't accept it. So your truth, your personal truth, is whatever you hold to be true. And if they then try and say, yes, but my truth is correct, well, what have you actually got? You've got somebody over there who is a human being who has received his input, who has an opinion that there is such thing as an absolute truth, and you have yourself who has an opinion that there isn't an absolute truth, and he has no priority over you. He's just another human. It doesn't matter. Truth isn't a democratic issue. I mean, God, if truth was based on the majority, then the government and the agenda would have win every time. And of course, it is why they do win every time. So, no, from my perspective, it's very simple. There is no absolute truth. Now, for a human. Now, what kind of entity could become aware of an absolute truth? Well, any entity, if we allow for a moment, let's say there are superior entities with higher awareness, soul, oversoul, galactic consciousnesses. Who knows? I mean, even if you had a consciousness the size of a galaxy, it can only know what it has absorbed relative to that galaxy. If we, just play with the game for a moment, what if other galaxies experience a different truth? And you can indeed And indeed, word has it that there are indeed galaxies or universes which based on different laws, different experiments. What if there is an original consciousness, which humans, might relate to as God or something. But what if there was a consciousness which is at the root of all consciousness, the root of all creation? Just play with it. Does it have it is possibly the only contender for actually knowing is absolute truth, because it is everything. But what if it gives birth to all these different levels of consciousness, and what if it doesn't even know that there is an absolute truth, because as far as it's concerned, it's all a matter of creation? What if you can create the laws of physics? Well, let's try this law of physics over here and try this law of physics over there. It may seem absurd, but essentially you can really say two things. Firstly, two or three things. Firstly, as a human being, you are only ever, realistically, going to come up, most people are only going to come up against other human beings on social media or wherever, and they're going to have their opinions and you're going to have your opinion, and they have no superiority over you. So it doesn't matter if they believe in an absolute truth, it's just their opinion. It doesn't matter if they believe that you have free will or you don't have free will. It doesn't matter if they believe that there is a God or there isn't a God. It's just a human having an opinion. So to me, the first observation is that from my perspective, there's no absolute truth. And if you come up with what you think is an absolute truth, well, congratulations. And this is the second point. I have no objection if you live according to that premise. I don't mind if you live according to the premise there is no free will. I don't mind if you live with the premise that we are just sacks of flesh. I don't mind if you live with the premise that there is a God that looks after you, or you're going to go to heaven or hell. It doesn't matter. Not to me. Not until, and this is all another topic, not until you try to interfere with my life. Well, then your opinion has given you permission to be a tyrant with regard to my life. And there's a whole other topic here. There are really only two modes of operation for a human being. You're either being courteous or you're being a tyrant. And again, of course, this is only from my perspective, but it's my perspective consistent with IAM. It's also consistent with a source that I've paid attention to, as it pointed out. You are all students here. We're all learning. We're all experiencing life according to our own best ability. So if someone says, "No, you're not allowed to think that," well, firstly, you actually can't stop me thinking that, not until you put a chip in my brain. But the second element is, who gave you the power or the right to interfere with my life? Now, jumping to an issue that people say, I think is a bit of a straw man argument. There's some validity to it. Is it? Yeah, but if we all did what we wanted, you could go and kill people and that would be all right. Well, firstly, how many people do go around feeling like they want to kill people? Not many. How many people go around thinking they want to change how other people think? A lot. So, firstly, no. You don't suddenly get anarchy because you've got an awful lot of sensible reasons, whether you're an atheist or you don't need a divine book to tell you that cooperating is very useful. That's a perfectly simple economic observation. So there's a lot of topics that come out of this, which is again why I focus on IAM as a key element, which is ultimately I'm here and I'm going to do my best to live my life according to what seems appropriate to me. Now, if you believe in, and it's unfair to call it science as though religion and metaphysics are not science, which in a sense they're not, but neither is atheism. Atheism isn't science. Science firstly, is in its purest form a limited and restricted and focused perspective on the world that says I will operate only from within certain key limitations. Just like maths, maths doesn't get involved with, blue is the best colour. You can have any opinion you like. Maths doesn't get involved in psychology. I mean, a psychologist may make use of maths if they think they can, but maths doesn't get involved in psychology. It doesn't say, well, my belief is that circles are better than squares. It's just nothing to do with maths. Maths is a set of, should we say, rules which have proven to be very effective for reasoned argument within the limited sphere of mathematical reasoning. Likewise, physics, whatever. But we've seen also that science can be bored because it's run by humans. So when an atheist says, science is right, religion is wrong, well, again, it's a little bit of a straw man, a little bit of an irrelevancy. Science will do the best true science will do the best it can to get a reasonable, effective and validated perspective. And if it gets it wrong, in theory, open debate and discovery and improvements in understanding will lead to a better science. But that doesn't mean that that someone who wears the cloak of a scientist cannot lie. Doesn't mean that they can't falsify data. Doesn't mean that they can't offer a perspective that isn't backed up by actual proper observation. And of course, once debate is shut down, then science is completely invalidated, because now you can't do science. You can't do science without debate. You can't do science without the freedom to discuss what may be so. So, without going overboard, I just want to make that observation on truth. I mean, and a tiny little anecdote. While I was having this rather fun and discussion about absolute truth and whatever, this person came on, said that I had an intrinsic contradiction because I was presenting that there is no absolute truth and an absolute truth, and I pointed out, well, every one of my remarks should be prefaced with it's my perspective that, but if I had to say it's my perspective that, it's my perspective that, it's my perspective that, it would get a bit repetitive. So there's an implicit it's my perspective that anytime I offer a thought or an opinion. And he then came back with a very long, or reason for a comment, analysis, an argument as to why I was wrong, and what was wrong with my brain, and what was wrong with my thinking, and what was wrong. At which point I said, you've created a fantasy. Let's just let it go. It's not for me to challenge your fantasy, your perspective of what I am, of what's going on inside my head. And he came back and said, it's like, fine, it's your harm, you're an idiot, it's your problem. So I thought, yeah, there's several elements there. It's like, remember going back to courtesy, it's like, you know what? Maybe we could dissect this so that eventually we would come to the point where we understood why your behavior wasn't exactly courteous or whatever. But at the end of the day, just let it go. But it does touch on the, again, arising somewhat, or from my sense of I am, it's like, why I focus on courtesy. I'll offer you my thoughts, and when it gets contentious, we seem to have a thing about abortion right now, which I'll touch on briefly. But again, probably may deserve a topic on its own. Incredibly contentious. Again, it seems to be that this phenomenon of where people, especially when they believe in, should we say, a dogma or an agenda, they believe they have the entitlement to now get aggressive because they're in the right. And you just have to look at how aggressive people get about the COVID, the vaccine, how aggressive they get about the whole Ukraine thing. God forbid you offer an alternative perspective. Right to life, of course, massive, and just, but you know, of course, there's always it's disingenuous. It's right to life of a small growth as opposed to right to life of an adult. But they don't sit. You know, they've taken the right to life and made it theirs. You're not right to life because you're not on their side, and that gives them the mantle of superiority and the mantle that and then from that superiority they can get aggressive and whatever. So there's a lot of topics that kind of circle or arise from such a simple issue, which ultimately comes down to how we relate to truth, to value, to entitlement. And as I say, it really comes down to courtesy or tyranny. If you either respect somebody else for being entitled to have a perspective on life that is not yours, or you don't. And if you don't, you feel entitled to punish them, or argue against them, or persuade them otherwise, or save them, or do whatever. And there's a certain element of like, well, okay, that's humans, that's debate. But when it comes to the place that they're entitled to threaten you, when it comes to the place they're entitled to insult you, when it comes to the place where they're entitled to change the laws against you, to restrict your freedoms because they're right, well, it gets to being a pretty core issue. So we go back to, how do we know you're right? How do we know that what you're saying is truth? Can we actually have an absolute truth? Which is, hence, this video. I would say no. You may disagree, but guess what? That's exactly what I'm saying. I believe I have a truth that I operate from, and you have a different truth that you operate from. That's fine. We can have two truths. But I personally don't believe that one human is superior to another. And if it is your perception that you have that there is an absolute truth out there, and you're the one that has it, well, okay, I have no problem with that. I just don't need to take it seriously. And that ultimately is the recourse, the power, the freedom that we have as individuals, which is ultimately one of the biggest and last defenses against what we're experiencing in the world today, which is, it doesn't matter what they say, even if they hold you down and jab you, hold a gun to your head, whatever, you will, up to the point that the bullet goes through your brain and you're no longer capable of thought, you will have the capacity to decide what your perspective is. And that, to me, I think, is a critical resource and source of strength in these difficult times.